or the early birds among everyone. What we will plan to do at the beginning of each day until the end of the meeting now is take a few moments to look back at the previous day and pick out some of the key points. Sometime during the day today, all of the summaries for all of the sessions that took place yesterday will be posted around in the hall, and also you'll all be emailed the summaries once they're ready to be emailed. So sometime during the day today, you'll receive yesterday's summaries, and that will continue until the end of the meeting. There will be a session, I'll announce this again when more people are in the room, but there'll be a session on Friday where you'll try to integrate those summaries into a common output from your track that will be presented in the Friday closing session. So if I can ask if you could put yesterday's summary up on the screen. Perfect. And so what we'll try to do is just, obviously there was a lot of discussion and many people have made contributions, and the rapporteurs have done a fabulous job in collecting some of the information from each discussion into a summary report for the session. So it's very difficult to pick the high points because there are many, as you'll see when you read through the summaries. But I wanted to certainly focus on a couple of the high points from the plenary sessions and then several from the track sessions. In the first plenary session on international and regional systems and programs, I think we heard a bit about disappointing progress in our field, disappointing progress in improving the use of medicines, but potential hope for a way forward. In Kathy's initial presentation, she's done a remarkable job in synthesizing everything we know that's been published in this field since 1985, the Nairobi conference that first called for improving the use of medicines. And in her data and in her perspective, I think we heard that the use of medicines continues to be nearly as bad as it was when we first started our work. And a lot of the lack of action has to do with national will to create the structures to be able to improve the use of medicines, and also commitment to this topic. And maybe a strategic error on our part in how we present the need to improve the use of medicines to people who are making decisions about allocation of resources and strategy. And our lack of action and their lack of action is really contributing to a global tragedy. But in the presentation by Klaus and the discussion that followed, I think we heard a lot of ideas about how we can actually start on new steps forward that have some promise. One of the ideas that came out of that session, which I really thought was something that we should recommend as a conference, is to create an independent think tank, a multi-stakeholder think tank that can start to strategize about how we can actually make progress, in which a small group of responsible actors, including industry and academia and governments and universities and NGOs, could identify situations in which we can work together and actually try to achieve progress in areas that we all recognize are important. In the second plenary session, I thought it was much more hopeful than the first, honestly, and I think we heard what can happen when a country makes a commitment to trying to actually achieve something in this field. We heard the tale of two countries that are actually making rapid progress and in very different ways. In Oman, the success was related to the establishment of a special unit in the government that was responsible for rational use of medicines. And because of that focus, they're able to interface with other parts of the government system and the private sector to try to achieve positive change in a whole variety of ways. But I think what we heard from the minister and also from Jeff Abertul, who made the presentation, was the importance of unwavering political will and support in order to really make progress. In China, we heard a different story, but another positive one, where health reform is really succeeding in many respects due to, again, strong political support. And there we heard that it's not just the Ministry of Health, it's a cross-section of the ministries that relate to pharmaceuticals that are trying to coordinate and implement quite a broad-ranging health reform. And at the core of the health reform are two issues, I think, that are important to us. One of them is improving access to and use of essential medicines, and the second is improving financing, which enable people to actually afford the medicines. So the group sessions, the discussions sounded like they were wonderful, and it was very hard to pick out the real highlights. But let me just pick out some quotes from sessions that struck me. This came out of the plenaries as well, but the generic industry is an important and often missing stakeholder in this discussion, and we need to find ways after this conference to engage. And the generic industry actually makes many of the medicines that are on essential medicines lists. We feel, and many countries feel, there are concerns about quality and concerns about price and concerns about promotion from the generic industry, and we need to develop a strategy to engage them and actually make progress in that area. In many of the sessions, this same point came up. I could have almost gotten this out of every session. There's an urgent need for objective monitoring of the impact of policy change. Governments and institutions at the national level do not automatically include monitoring and evaluation in the policy change process, and we're never going to learn what works and what doesn't work until we start to measure that in a coherent way. There were many sessions that mentioned the private sector, and I thought this quote was particularly telling. An unregulated for-profit private sector in low-income countries is a market failure, and these should be treated as failed states. We have a failed state in almost every country, and that state is the private sector and how medicines are used, and we need to take the same kind of urgent action that we take in trying to address failed states at the national level. Here's one from the antimicrobial resistance session. The spread and impact of antimicrobial resistance meets the definitions of a global pandemic. We have a global pandemic that nobody is recognizing, and it's everybody's business, because if we lose effectiveness of antibiotics, our health systems that have made such progress in that area in recent decades are going to start to fail themselves. In the economic session, the issue of evaluation came up again, and it's surprising how little evidence we actually have about all of the efforts to make drugs affordable, and there's an urgent need to evaluate the interventions that governments are taking to try to work on the area of price and affordability, and again, calling for a plan for monitoring and evaluation in policy changes that target price as an endpoint. And here are two. This theme came up in every single session, and it's the impact, the potential impact of technology in our field. There's a need to develop technology and tools that can improve data collection in the systems that we're trying to work in at the primary levels, and figure out ways of using that information more effectively to try to make change in the healthcare system. But also that technology also offers potential for interventions, and several of the sessions focused on mHealth and eHealth technologies, and we're beginning to see evidence in the countries in which we work, low and middle income countries, that number one, they're not only feasible, but they're not only effective, but that they're also sustainable and scalable to do things like improve stockouts and availability, but across the range, to work on adherence, to work on chronic illness and reminders to patients with chronic illness. So certainly one of the main thrusts that comes out of this conference is to try to make the work in information technology more coherent and to try to build on some of these early experiences. So Before we start the actual session today, I'm just going to make a couple of announcements for what will be happening during the rest of the week, and actually one that will pertain to this evening. I mentioned that we'll have outputs from each of the tracks presented on Friday in the closing session. All of you will be participating in the creation of those presentations by your track leaders. And that session, it actually doesn't appear correctly on the program, I don't believe. Between 11:30 in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, in the rooms in which each track is meeting, you'll have a group meeting. Hopefully your track leaders will have prepared a preliminary draft of what they think is important to share about your track. But we hope that you will work with them to finalize that so that during the afternoon session they're able to present the collective wisdom and the summary of the outputs from the track. Since we're producing each of the individual session summaries in this format, it may make sense for the track leaders to structure the presentation on Friday in the same, to follow the same flow. What are the main lessons that you want to bring forward from your track? What are the key policy recommendations, and what are the main recommendations for gaps in research? Each session will have 10 minutes. Session leaders will give you the same message that you're giving each of the presenters. That means no more than 10 slides. Please keep it within a 10-minute presentation. And if you could get those slides to the audiovisual department immediately after the morning session, that 1 p.m. session, they'll be ready for the afternoon presentations. The summaries from all of the rapporteurs, as I mentioned, will be available later today. They've already gone, I hope, to the track leaders. You'll see the unedited version, but all of you in the conference will receive the edited version, which is really only making language and grammar consistent across the summaries, sometime by email today, and they'll be posted outside the rooms. And then the final announcement, for those of you who are involved with INRAD, and you know who you are, and we would love to have an opportunity to collectively gather. And there's a meeting scheduled in Azurit room, which is one of the rooms in the entrance to the poster hall, at 6 p.m. this evening. So if we can invite you all to assemble there at 6 o'clock, we'll have a chance to just review where INRAD's come since 1990 and where we think we'll be going following this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Great to have you.